Hi guys, welcome back. Today we're going to be making apple galettes. You might be thinking, what is a galette? I have never heard that term before. And a galette is just like an apple pie, except instead of fussing with the dough and making sure it's perfectly round and everything's right in the pie crust, we're going to be just making this right on a cookie sheet. And it's basically like a rustic apple pie. Super easy to make. Kind of takes the pressure off of making a perfect pie. So if you guys are ready, pause the video here and let's go wash our hands. Okay, welcome back. If you guys are ready to get started, let's go over the ingredients that we're going to need for this recipe. So we have our crust ingredients and then we have our filling ingredients. So let's start with the crust. You're going to need 1.5 cups of flour, 1/4 cup of sugar, 1/4 teaspoon of salt, 1/2 cup of cold butter, and 1/4 cup of water. And for our filling, you're going to need 2 to 3 large apples, 1/4 cup of brown sugar, 1.5 tablespoons of flour, 2 teaspoons of lemon juice, 1 teaspoon of cinnamon, 1/4 teaspoon nutmeg, and 1 tablespoon milk. All right, you've got your ingredients, we're ready to go. So we're gonna make these apple galettes in a jiffy. So I'm gonna start with our mixing bowl that we're gonna use to mix our dough in, and I'm gonna measure the first ingredient right into this bowl, just to save a step. So we want 1.5 cups of flour. I'm using just a regular all-purpose flour. If you need, you can use a gluten-free flour or whatever you'd like for your family. So 1, and this is a 1/2 cup. Just double check that you're got the right measurements there. And as always, if I go too fast for you, just pause me, beep, and come back to me when you're ready, okay? So 1.5 cups of flour, put that aside, and we're gonna do 1/4 cup of sugar. So just a little bit of sugar. And you can either shake it off like that, or again, use your knife to just fill the cup and then level it off. Oh, we're gonna mix the sugar right in there too. Sorry guys. I like to usually measure everything out separately for you so that if you make a mistake, we can go back. But I made the mistake this time. We got the flour and the sugar together. That's okay. Next thing is salt. So just 1/4 teaspoon of salt, which is not a lot. We just want a little bit of salt. And again, I use this pink Himalayan sea salt. That's why it's pink in color. But whatever salt you have will work just fine. Okay, and then the next thing we're gonna do is get the butter ready. So I have a cutting board here. Going to move some of these things out of the way. And the nice thing is, if you buy your butter in a brick like this, it's got the measurements already printed right on the side for you. So this says 1 cup. So if I wanted 1 cup of butter, I would cut right here. We're just going to do 1/2 cup. So I'm just going to cut here and just use this little bit right there. Now the downside to doing it this way is that sometimes you get little pieces of the wrapper in your butter, so you have to be really careful. Take a look and make sure that you have no foil stuck to your butter. And consequently, if you were using something different, you could always use a measuring cup to make sure that you had the right amount of butter. So the next step is, with making pastry, you always want really cold butter, and so you want to touch it as minimally as possible during this process so that your hands don't warm up the butter. You know what, I'm gonna go with a bit of a bigger knife. Just so I don't have to touch it as much. So you're just gonna cut this, this is gonna be called cubing it. You're really just gonna cut it into slices like this. And then with each piece, you're just going to cut it again. And it's okay if they all stick on like that. And then again into little cubes. And if you can line them up, you can cut them all in one go, just like that. So you're going to see in a moment what we're going to do with all of those little cubes. So I can already see that the butter is starting to melt onto my fingers, so I'm just trying to touch it as little as possible. They don't have to be perfectly all the same size, just as long as they're all about similar. You're going to see how they get cut into our dough in just a second. Alrighty, so we got the butter there ready to go. I'm going to bring back our bowl. So this is the bowl. We've got the flour, the sugar, and we're going to add the salt. And just give that a whisk so that all of those ingredients are blended together. And then we're going to add in our butter. So just carefully dropping the cubes of butter in just like this. Now, next step, if you have a tool in your kitchen called a pastry cutter, you could ask your parents if you have one. If not, you don't need one. I'm going to show you what else you can use. So just to give you a show, we've got all of our dry ingredients there. You've got your cubed butter. And then the last thing before I start to put my hands in the dough, I'm just going to measure out 1/4 cup of water. And again, as cold as your tap makes it. And we're just going to set that aside to add to our dough as we go. So it's going to get a little messy here. But if you don't have a pastry cutter, you can use the next best thing, which is your hand. So you just want to crumble without keeping the butter in your hands for too long, because again, you don't want it to melt by the temperature of your fingers. And you're just going to crumble that butter into the flour mixture. And I'm going to show you in a second what this looks like. So working pretty fast, this is kind of fun if you like to get dirty. You want to work pretty quickly. And if you had the pastry cutter tool, you would just be using that tool to do this work for you. So what it looks like before I add the water is just like that. Can you see that? So it's just a bit of a crumbly mess. So the next thing you're going to do is just a little bit at a time. We're just going to add some water and then do the same thing. And you're going to start to see a dough come together. So this recipe for this crust here, you could use for any pie. You could make a pumpkin pie and have this as your base. Peach pie, strawberry pie, whatever you like. So you can start to see it's coming together. I'm just going to add that last little bit here. So it's a bit of a balance of a little bit of liquid, mix it, because you don't want it runny at all, but at the same time you don't want it crumbly, you want it to all come together. So in the end, you should have something that resembles this here. So it's a bit of a sticky dough. So I'm gonna grab a little bit of flour, just put that down on the counter. So what this does is it just keeps the dough from sticking to the counter. And you're just gonna kind of knead it a little bit to make sure that you've gotten all the sticky parts out. And it's gonna start to look like a dough. This is the fun part where you can get all your anger out by like kneading the dough. If your little brother made you mad today, you could just like, you know. Okay. So in the end, you just looks something like this. Pretty simple, right? Okay, before I wash my hands, the last thing we're gonna do is just take a piece of plastic wrap, which I've pre-cut. So if you need to pause and go grab some plastic wrap, you can do that. Or if you have a Ziploc bag or whatever you use in your kitchen, I'm just gonna wrap this up and I'm gonna stick this in the fridge just to chill, again, because we want that butter to get nice and cold again, while we make the filling, okay? So let's go pop this in the fridge. And then we wash our hands. Okay, so we've got our dough chilling in the fridge, and we're gonna do the filling now. So we've got our apples. My apples are pretty small, so it calls for 2 to 3 large apples. Mine are pretty small, so I'm gonna do 5. So the first thing we wanna do is peel these. And if you've never used a peeler before, this is something you might need a hand with. You can go back. I've actually done a little video on how to use a peeler. So if you can go back and watch that video and then come back and join us here if you need a little bit of help. But we're just gonna, you do whichever way works best for you. For me, it works best to hold the apple and turn it in my hand. For some kids, you have to hold it still on the cutting board and pull towards you. Or if you're afraid of cutting yourself, because this part of the peeler here is like a little knife. So if that makes you nervous, you can just push it away from you, just like this, and then you know you're not gonna cut yourself. So we're gonna do this with all of these apples, and don't worry, this skill takes a little bit of time to master. So if I'm going way faster than you, that's okay. I've been peeling apples for over 40 years. And so you just take your time. If you need to pause the video here so that you have some time to peel your apples, or maybe you want to ask someone in the house to come and help you to make it go a little faster, then just pause us here and then come back and join us when you're ready to go, okay? So I'm gonna go quick. So now that we've got them peeled, I'm actually gonna save my peels because I'm gonna show you in another video what you can use the peels for. So hang on to those and then you can check out my next video on apple cider vinegar. Okay, so we've got our apples here. Now we're gonna cut them into smaller pieces. So let me just move these over the side. So you want them small enough that nobody's gonna get a giant mouthful of apple. So I like to hold my apple like that and then cut off each of the sides. And then I have a flat surface here where I can just cut off the ends. And then I just compost that little piece there. And then with these, you're just gonna go ahead, just like the onion, and you're gonna cut them into smaller pieces. Just keep your fingers back, and you just want little pieces, just like that. Kind of like the butter. And if you have a little bit of peel left over onto your apple like this, it's all right. It's not gonna change. You don't want too much peel, but having a little bit's not gonna harm your end result. Whoop. have apples that have started to bruise or go brown a little bit, that's a good time to use them in cooking as well. So apples that are just starting to turn and go bad are really good to use for pies or applesauce. Because once you cook them down, nobody can tell. Also, another great tip is if you have apples that are starting to turn like this, but you're not really ready to make a pie or anything like that, you can do this step here and then put them in a Ziploc bag and put them in your freezer. And then when you are ready to make your pie, you'll have your apples all ready to go. Ta-da! So you've got all your apples done, ready to go into our bowl. So again, just use your hands to scoop them up. Put them into a bowl. Okay, here's a little secret. Everybody knows that once apples are exposed to the air, they start to turn brown color, and then nobody likes to eat them. So I'm going to show you what you can do so that that doesn't happen. So you're going to take some lemon, cut it in half. I like to just sort of pick the seeds out if you can. Just ones that you can see on the top there. You could also do this with a fork if you're a little bit nervous about using a knife. All right, and then I'm going to show you a tool that you can use. It's called a citrus press, which you would put your lemon in here like this and then just squeeze like that. The recipe calls for, I believe it is a teaspoon, 2 teaspoons. Again, this is something you can just eyeball. So you can either use a citrus press like that, like I just showed you, or you can also just take a very expensive, not very expensive, everybody has one of these in their kitchen, fork, and hold it this way. And then as you're just squeezing, got some more seeds coming out. As you just squeeze, make sure you take those seeds out. Use the fork to twist and your other hand to squeeze, and it works just the same as a citrus press. So you can try that one at home. Okay, so we have our apples and we have our lemon juice on there, and we're going to add in the rest of the ingredients into here to make our filling. So 1/4 of a cup of brown sugar. You could also use coconut sugar if you wanted to use something that's a little bit less refined. Now the secret when you're measuring brown sugar is you want to make sure that you pack it in there. When you see brown sugar in a recipe, it's always assumed that you've packed it down. Just like with the flour, it's always assumed that you've leveled it off with a knife or something flat. With the brown sugar, you want to make sure you've packed it down with your fingers just like that, and it's going to come out in one big clump. Okay, just rinse my fingers. We're going to use 1.5 tablespoons of flour. So this is just going to make the filling thicken up a little bit when it's cooking. So there's 1. And I don't have a half measurement for a tablespoon here, so I'm just going to eyeball by filling my tablespoon about half full. We're going to do 1 teaspoon of cinnamon. Pop my lid here, maybe. So again, just kind of eyeball 1 teaspoon, 1/4 teaspoon of nutmeg. So this is something different I'm going to show you. Normally you would buy nutmeg just like how you buy your cinnamon, which is ground already, or you can also buy your spices whole. Some of them. Cinnamon sticks you can buy whole. This is nutmeg whole. So you can see, and if you smell it, it smells so good. So nutmeg is actually not a nut, it's a seed. So if you have anybody that has nut allergies, you don't have to worry about that. But I'm just gonna grate a little bit into my filling. Just having the whole the whole seed makes for a more powerful flavor because it is freshly ground, as opposed to having sat on a shelf in a store or in your cupboard for months. It's nice, it's gonna be really, really fresh. If you don't have fresh, you're gonna use previously ground nutmeg, and then you're just gonna use 1/4 teaspoon to measure that out, which would look something like this. And the last ingredient is 1 tablespoon of your dairy-free milk. So you can use anything in this case. You could use, I'm using oat milk. You could use soy milk or almond milk, hemp, cashew, doesn't matter, whatever you'd like to use. And that's it. Now we're gonna mix it together. So the sugar adds a little bit of sweetness, the cinnamon and nutmeg add a little bit of spice, the flour helps bring it all together and thicken up, and the lemon stops the apples from turning brown, and the oat milk is just gonna provide a little bit of moisture. So what happens is when we put this inside of our pie filling, or our pie crust, it's going to cook inside that dough in the oven, and it'll be nice. You'll have nice, soft, cooked apples. All right, so that's the filling. Let's put it all together. Okay, so we've got our dough back from the fridge, so it's been kept nice and cold while we were busy making our filling, and now you're going to unwrap it. And spread a little bit of flour back on your counter again. Now, you can do a couple of things. You can make mini galettes by dividing your dough into smaller discs. I'm gonna say, let's make 2. If you wanted to make more, you could just double the ingredients of the crust and of the filling, and you could make individual galettes for everybody in your family if you really wanted to. So you're going to take a rolling pin, and the first thing you want to do is take a little bit of that flour and just coat your rolling pin. This prevents the pin from sticking to your dough. And you're just going to kind of roll it out in just a rough circle. Like, doesn't have to be perfect at all. That's why this recipe is so good, because it doesn't need to be perfect. In fact, if it's not perfect, it looks better, I think. Anyway. Okay, so I've got my pie crust there. Just want to be able to make sure you can lift it up so that we can put it onto our cookie sheet. And then what you're going to do is just gently fill the inside with your apple mixture. So if you're doing 2 galettes, then I would do about half of your apple mixture in one and reserve the other half for the other galette. And then the last step is just folding your dough over the top. So you're going to fold in one side and then just gently kind of like fold it in on itself. And that's it. Just looks like a bit of a rustic apple blossom. So I'm just going to put that onto my cookie sheet. And then I'm going to do my second one, and I'll put that one right here. All right, so we've got these ready to go in the oven. The last step we are going to do is just brush the outside with a little bit of that oat milk to finish them off, and this will just help them brown up a little bit in the oven. This is the fun part. It's like painting your pastry. So this is just a pastry brush that I'm using. You could always just use your fingers if you didn't have a brush. There we go. So that's it. Now they're going to go into the oven at 375 for about 35 minutes. All right, we have our apple galette now out of the oven. I'm going to cut this open so that you guys can take a look and see what it looks like on the inside. The pastry crust is so flaky, it's perfect. There you go. So, so good. I need a knife and a fork though, so I'm not going to eat this one now, but if you want to take this recipe to the next level, be sure to check out the video for the salted caramel sauce and drizzle that on top. It'll be perfect. Bye guys, thanks for watching.